Welcome to another video. In this tutorial, I'll be explaining the vectors within Unity. So let's get started. What I have done so far is created a new scene and an empty object called player, and just simply connected a script called vectors to it. So just create a new script called vectors and drag it into the player. Double click on it to open the script, and this is what you should see. In Unity, there's a few vectors, but the main ones I'm going to be explaining is vector 2 and also vector 3. These are the main ones that we use every day to store values and be used all the time. So I'm going to start off by explaining vector 2 first. But first, I'm going to make both of these public so we can better see it in the inspector. Vector 2 and vector 3. I'm going to name this, I will name this x and y because that is the value it gives you. I'll be explaining this in more detail later, and then I'll just simply name this x, y, and z. So save this and go back to Unity. If you were confused about what I did with the public and stuff, I'll put a card on the top right of the video where I've made a video on explaining the publics and privates. So as you can see here in the inspector, it opened up a few fields that we can use. So for the vector 2, if you remember, we put it first right here. It's basically taking in two values, just two numbers, x and y. Hence on the inspector, x and y. And for vector 3, hence the name 3, it takes in three numbers, x, y, and z. This can simply be written as just 3 int. So int, and then another int. All of this is basically a vector 3, and 2 ints is equal to 1 vector 2. That is what you're seeing here as well. So one value x, one value y, that's for the vector 2, and x, y, and z, that's vector 3. One value for x, one value for y, and one value for z. So an actual in-game example where we will use this is that when we are making a 2D game, if you go in your scene and click on this 2D icon, it will switch to 2D. We'll be using the vector 2 to store most of our values, because in 2D games we only have two axes. So if I select the player and move it, the y axis, and then you got the x axis. So if you look on the right hand side, when I move this object, you will see that when I move the red, the x changes. When I move on the green axis, the y changes. And there's no extra axis for me to move the z on. So let's change back to 3D, and right now you see that there's an extra blue arrow. That is what the z is for. So if I move this, it's the extra axis. So this is why for vector 2 you got two values, because it's mostly used for 2D games, and vector 3 mostly used for 3D games because there's three axes. Therefore you can store three values. So I think I've mentioned this, but I've made videos on how to use vector 3 in a game to make your own little system. So I'll be leaving a card on the top right corner of the video, and I'll show you a way to modify all these values right in the editor. So what you want to do is, for example, if you want to change the vector 2 value, you would change the x and y. So what you want to do is, for example, on start, I want the x and y equal to new, and then you do vector 2, because it's taking this vector and then changing it. So we need a new vector 2 because it's trying to modify the value. If we use any other value, they won't have enough values to change it. So vector 2, for example, I want to change the y to be 1 up. I'll do this and save it. The reason is I do it like we do it in this way is because we need to create a new vector 2 to store the value to give it back to this in order to change this. There's no other way to change this value unless you have another value which gives 2 value in return, so then you can apply it into this vector 2 to change it. So let's go back to Unity, and you'll see that when we run the game, the y will be set to 1 right there. So we can use this to make it so that when game starts, set the position of the player to a certain point in the world. So we can connect this up to the position of the cube. So we'll see that, for example, transform dot position equals to x, y, and z. So right there. And on start, we'll modify this. So I'll add z and vector 3. So I want it to be 1 up. Yeah, for example, 1 up, just for now. Save this, go back to Unity. And right now we've hooked it up. So let's reset this position of the cube so it's clear to see. Right now it's at 0, 0, 0. If we run this game, and you'll see that the value of the cube gets immediately changed to 1 when we start the game. Because in the start method, I am setting the transform dot position of this object to x, y, and z, which is equal to a vector that takes in 3 values, and the values are 0, 1, and 1. And I often get confused when I first started with a new vector. This is only because when we pass a new value in with no other inputs that turn our number into another value we can use, we just say new vector because it's taking another vector 3 to pass into this. Otherwise, this won't accept any other value that's not 3 values. So we'll do new vector 3 because there's another vector passed into this vector. And for the vector 3 value, I'll set it to 0, 1, and 1, which is x, y, and z, like the name right here. So when we start the game, this gets set to y equals to 1. And you can use this for repositioning your object in the scene when the game starts. And this will not only work on transform.position or anything like that. So it basically works on anything that takes in 3 values. So transform.local scale, which is just changing the scale of the player. So if I go back to Unity, it's basically just changing the scale. So it's the reason it's called local scale is because it's on this object. So transform.local scale equals x, y, and z. And right now it's set to 0, 1, and 0. So if we save this and go back into Unity, when we run the game, this should change to 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. But you might be asking, if I change this to rotation, transform.rotation, this will not work. Because if you hover over it, it says cannot implicitly convert to type Unity engine.quaternion. Basically, rotation in Unity uses a different system where it does not take in a vector 3. So we cannot use it here. And I kind of explained it in another video, which I'll be leaving on the top right corner of this video. And so there's many occasions where you will see this and vector 3 is not accepted in this format because this is using a variable called quaternion instead of a vector 3. And you can utilize this method to make a simple movement for your game. For example, what I did is just that I hooked up the vector 3 with the position of our object and I changed it by 1 every time I press space. So if I run the game, and now if I press space once, you'll see that the Z position of our vector 3 gets changed by 1 and so does our position. So you can use this to create a simple movement script like so. And you can make it so that when you press a different key, it goes to the right or the left. Utilize this to make your own 2D or 3D game, however you want. For 3D games, or for any games in general, for any type of game, there's so many ways to move around. And this is just one. And for 3D, we mainly use 3 types. Our custom-made scripts, character controller, and rigid body. And I've already made a simple video on rigid body, which I'll be linking in the top right corner of this video. And I'm planning to do a video on character controller soon. So keep an eye out for that. And this is a simple way to make your own character moving script just by changing the position of the vector and set the position of the transform to this vector. So the code will look like this. So at the start, I'm setting the position to, for example, the center of the world or wherever our level is. So it will be, for example, our level is at 0, 1, 0. That's the start of our level. And what I want to do is, if I press space, I want it to move by 1. So I'm taking the Z, which is, if you remember, is the blue axis, and because there's 3 values, I can just take dot Z. So xyz dot Z equals Z plus 1. Every time I press space, this is equal to 0, 0, 1. So I'm changing this to 0, 1, 1 because this is already set to 1. It's not 0 anymore. But for example, if this was 0, 0, 0, I'm just adding simply 1 onto the end over here. So every time I press space, this will be 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 3. And I'm just setting the transform dot position to x, y, and z, which is 0, 1, how many times you want to press it. So let's see this in action now that I've explained what's happening behind the scenes. So immediately you will see that it gets set to 0, 1, 0, and the position is 0, 0, 0. Because, yeah, there we go. We haven't set the value yet because we are setting the value after we press space. And you'll see that if each time I press space, the Z gets increased by 1. So 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 3, 0, 1, 4, 0, 1, 5. And you can make this very flexible and create your own unique ideas and create your own character controller that gives off a feeling that you really like. So that's gonna be it for this video. I hope this has helped you in some way. This is a topic that really confused me when I started game developing, and I hope you have enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.